They told men that marriage was the mark of maturity. The final stage of evolution: you meet the right girl, settle down, buy a house, have kids, build a family. That's the script. The holy checklist of adulthood. Society sold it like a fairy tale. You'll become a real man when you have a wife. But something changed. The curtain fell, the music stopped, and the illusion cracked. Because men started noticing something that no one ever warned them about. That the same contract meant to protect love can quietly destroy everything else they worked for. Their money, their freedom, their peace, even their identity. For decades, men believed marriage was about partnership, about building something together. But now, too many of them are watching that dream turn into a courtroom nightmare. They're not anti-love. They're anti-losing their entire life because love turned into a legal trap. You can roll your eyes, call it cynicism, but look around. The numbers don't lie. Men are opting out. Not because they hate women, not because they're afraid of commitment, but because they've started doing the math. And the math looks brutal. They're asking hard questions like, why does the same system that says we're equal still treat men like walking wallets in court? Why does a breakup mean one person loses half their income while the other keeps the house, the kids, and sympathy from everyone around? Why does love come with legal penalties harsher than most business contracts? And the most painful part? Most women don't even see it. They think men are just scared of responsibility. But that's not it. Men want responsibility, they just don't want to sign away their future for it. See, once upon a time, marriage made sense. A man worked, a woman stayed home, and both needed each other to survive. It was a fair trade, security for care, stability for devotion. But now, everyone's independent, everyone's self-sufficient, and the law still hasn't updated to reflect that. Today, marriage feels less like a bond and more like a business deal written in invisible ink, where the fine print always seems to favor one side. And when men finally start reading it carefully, they realize something horrifying. It's a contract that punishes failure like a crime. Here's what most women don't realize. Men don't fear marriage because they don't believe in love. They fear it because they've seen what happens when love dies. They've watched friends lose their homes, their kids, and their peace. Not because they were bad fathers or bad husbands, but because the system was designed decades ago and never evolved. They've seen their fathers, uncles, co-workers reduced to weekend visitors in their own children's lives. They've seen how easily, till death do us part turns into, until a lawyer decides what's fair. And slowly, one by one, they're deciding that maybe they'd rather risk loneliness than ruin. But here's where it gets deeper. It's not just about the money or the law. It's about how the meaning of marriage changed. For generations, marriage was about building something together. Now, it often feels like men are expected to provide while women evaluate. The man builds, the woman decides if it's enough. The man works overtime, buys gifts, sacrifices hobbies, and somehow still gets told he's emotionally unavailable, inattentive, or not enough. He's trying to meet expectations written by a culture that doesn't even believe in gratitude anymore. So he asks himself, what's the point? Why sign a contract that gives him all the liability and half the reward? That question isn't bitterness. It's survival. Because every man knows another man who did everything right and still got destroyed. Married young, stayed loyal, worked his ass off, and one day came home to an empty house, a divorce notice, and a lawyer saying, "We'll be in touch." They're not scared of women, they're scared of being powerless in a system that can take everything they've built. And the truth? Many women don't realize how deep this fear runs. They think men are just avoiding commitment. But really, men are avoiding pain. The kind of pain that comes with being trapped in a game where love isn't enough and fairness doesn't matter. There's a quiet rebellion happening. Not in the streets, not on TV, but in the minds of millions of men. They're redefining what success looks like. They're choosing peace over risk, solitude over chaos. They've realized that freedom isn't loneliness, it's safety. And that realization, it's spreading. So if you're wondering why fewer men are walking down the aisle, it's not because they've given up on love. It's because they've finally started reading the terms and conditions, and they don't like what they see. Let's start with the one that most people whisper about but few dare to say out loud. money. Because beneath every romantic vow and glittering wedding photo, there's a quiet, brutal truth men have begun to understand. Marriage is the only contract in modern life where failure can cost you everything, even when it's not your fault. Here's the reality no one posts on Instagram. For men, marriage isn't just about emotional risk anymore. It's financial Russian roulette. You can love someone with every atom of your being, stay loyal, work like hell to provide, and still end up in a courtroom watching your life get divided like a pizza you paid for but never got to eat. The statistics are blood-chilling. The average divorce costs between $15,000 and $30,000 just in legal fees. That's before alimony, before child support, before asset redistribution. And for the average man, that redistribution often means losing half his savings, half his pension, and sometimes the roof over his head. And no, prenups aren't the magic shield people think they are. Judges can tear them apart with a single phrase, unfair to one party. Boom, gone. Your legal safety net just evaporated because someone felt it wasn't balanced. Here's the part women rarely consider. For most men, it's not about greed. It's about risk management. If a man can lose his house, his business, and 18 years of income for a relationship that might end with one signature, is it really surprising he'd hesitate to sign? Men watched billionaires like Jeff Bezos lose $38 billion in a divorce. If the richest man on the planet couldn't protect himself, what chance does the average guy with a mortgage, 2 kids, and a 9-to-5 have? But it's not just the money, it's the psychology of it. Imagine spending your entire life building something. A business, a home, a future. And one day, half of it vanishes because 2 people stopped getting along. You're not abusive, not neglectful, just human. But in the eyes of the system, you're a walking liability. So men started connecting the dots. They realized the same system that says marriage is equality often ends in courtrooms where men are treated as financial safety nets, not equal partners. They started watching their friends, men who did everything right, being gutted emotionally and financially while being told to man up. And women still wonder why men hesitate. It's not that they don't want love. They just don't want ruin disguised as romance. Because here's the dark irony. When a marriage fails, everyone comforts the woman. She's told, you deserve better. You'll find someone new. But when it's the man who loses, the world laughs. He's a fool. He should have seen it coming. So men are learning. They're evolving. They're adapting to survive in a system that punishes trust. They're realizing that love, when tied to law, can become a weapon. And here's the most bitter truth of all. Most men would gladly risk heartbreak again, but they can't risk destruction. Because losing love hurts. But losing your life's work? That breaks something that doesn't heal. Freedom. That word alone makes every man's pulse quicken. Not because he's afraid of connection, but because deep down, he knows that once he signs that marriage certificate, something sacred begins to fade. His autonomy. See, it's not about the fear of sharing a life. It's about losing the right to steer it. In the beginning, it feels harmless. You're making joint decisions. You discuss vacations, purchases, what color to paint the living room. But somewhere along the way, those decisions stop feeling mutual. They start feeling like permission. He can't buy a new car without checking first. He can't go on a weekend trip with friends without a guilt trip. He can't sit in silence without being accused of shutting down. Bit by bit, his life becomes negotiated. Every choice comes with invisible approval stamps, and every no, I don't feel like it becomes a spark for a fight. It's not that he doesn't love her. He just misses himself. Research shows newly married men report a 21% drop in perceived personal freedom within the first 18 months. That's not just numbers. That's men quietly realizing that the price of companionship was their sense of agency. Imagine being constantly evaluated, corrected, reshaped into a better version of yourself. Not through growth, but through guilt. Why don't you talk more? Why do you always need space? Why can't you just be more affectionate? And the worst part? The man she fell in love with, confident, spontaneous, self-directed, slowly disappears under the constant micro-adjustments of marital compromise. He becomes careful, polite, predictable, and in the cruelest twist of all, once he becomes exactly what she asked for, She starts saying, "You've changed. You're not the same man I married." That's the paradox that's breaking men quietly from the inside. They're told to open up, but not too much, to lead, but only when it's convenient, to listen, but never to disagree. So they shut down, not because they want to, but because they've learned the hard way that every expression of individuality becomes an argument waiting to happen. He can't win. If he asserts himself, he's controlling. If he compromises, he's weak. If he withdraws, he's distant. And after years of this emotional whiplash, many men start to see marriage not as partnership, but as containment. Here's what women often misunderstand. A man's need for independence isn't rebellion, it's oxygen. Without it, he suffocates. Before marriage, a man's world is wide open, filled with dreams, risks, and personal victories. After marriage, that world often narrows into a routine. Every choice is filtered through a we. What he eats, where he goes, who he spends time with. The freedom that once defined him becomes the very thing he has to justify. He starts longing for his old self. Not because he regrets his partner, but because he misses the man he used to be. And the saddest truth? Society mocks that longing. They call it the midlife crisis. They laugh at men who buy motorcycles, travel solo, or start new hobbies. They don't see it for what it really is, a desperate attempt to reclaim autonomy in a world that shames men for needing it. That's why so many men are quietly opting out before they ever walk down the aisle. They're not commitment phobic. They're freedom preserving. They've seen what happens when a man loses his ability to choose. He doesn't explode. He fades. He doesn't rebel. He disconnects. And one day, he wakes up next to someone he loves deeply, but no longer recognizes the man in the mirror. That realization terrifies men more than loneliness ever could. Because loneliness is a quiet room. Marriage, for too many men, has become a quiet cage. And the smart ones, the observant ones, are deciding they'd rather live free and uncertain than safe and invisible. Let's strip away all the noise for a moment, the statistics, the studies, the memes, the debates. Forget the arguments about who ruined what or who's to blame. Because beneath it all, there's a much deeper truth. One that's been quietly growing in the hearts of men across the world. It's not that men stopped believing in love. It's that they stopped believing in safety inside love. Love, as it's sold today, has become a fragile deal dressed in poetic lies. You give your heart, your time, your loyalty, and in return, your promised partnership. But what happens when that partnership becomes surveillance? When love becomes leverage? When marriage becomes a system that no longer protects the person who built it? For generations, men were raised on the promise that being a husband was noble, that it meant duty, strength, sacrifice. And they carried that role with pride. But somewhere along the line, that duty turned into servitude. That strength became toxic. That sacrifice became invisible. He's told to provide, but also told that providing isn't enough. He's told to lead, but every decision is second-guessed. He's told to protect, but then accused of control. He's told to open up, but punished the moment his truth isn't convenient. And when he finally breaks, when his spirit cracks under the weight of it all, society doesn't comfort him. It laughs. You couldn't handle a real woman. You're weak. You're scared of commitment. But the truth, the one no one dares to say aloud, is that many men are simply exhausted from being everyone's anchor and no one's home. They're tired of giving endlessly to relationships that see their effort as obligation, not devotion. They're tired of trying to communicate in languages that twist everything they say into guilt. They're tired of hearing real men don't complain, while silently carrying the emotional, financial, and psychological load of two people. And they've started to notice something. The man who stays single isn't bitter, he's peaceful. He wakes up to quiet mornings, not silent wars. He spends money on his dreams, not on damage control. He builds his world without fear that one argument could erase half of it. He loves, but freely, not contractually. He might still fall in love, but he'll do it without the paper, without the legal leash, without the sword of divorce hanging above his neck. That's the evolution happening right now, quietly everywhere. Men are no longer chasing the fantasy of validation through marriage. They're chasing meaning, peace, selfhood. And here's what shakes people the most. Men aren't angry about it anymore. They're not ranting, they're not fighting the system, they're simply walking away. Calmly, quietly, completely. They've realized something radical. They don't need to be chosen to feel complete. Because marriage, as it stands, doesn't make a man whole. It often breaks the parts of him that once were. The spontaneous joy, the reckless hope, the boyish curiosity that once made him alive. Ask the average married man today how he feels. He'll smile politely and say, "I'm fine," but his eyes will tell the truth. A truth filled with resignation, not peace. He's surviving, not thriving. He's existing, not living. He's the man who learned to lower his voice, shorten his dreams, hide his frustrations. The man who jokes about being married with kids, but inside feels like a ghost of his former self. The man who can't even say out loud that he feels trapped, because that would sound ungrateful. So, men are doing the only logical thing left. They're refusing to enter the trap in the first place. They see the pattern now. They see the laws, the expectations, the imbalance. They see how one wrong choice can destroy a decade of work. And they're saying, not me. They still believe in love, just not in the version that demands surrender as proof. They still believe in women, just not in the ones who confuse control with care. They still believe in family, but not at the cost of their soul. And here's what's truly frightening to the system. These men are happy. They're building lives filled with freedom, adventure, and purpose. They're forming brotherhoods, pursuing goals, rediscovering who they are without constant criticism echoing in their ears. They're proving that you can have fulfillment without permission, meaning without marriage, love without loss. It's not rebellion, it's rebirth. And women, the wise ones, are starting to notice. They're realizing that real partnership doesn't come from a contract. It comes from choice, from mutual respect, from balance, from two people standing side by side, not one towering above while the other kneels beneath. The bitter truth isn't that men don't want marriage. It's that marriage, as it stands, no longer wants men. It wants their labor, their loyalty, their protection, but not their truth. And until that changes, men will continue walking their own road, building their own kingdom, living their own peace. They'll love deeply, but they'll do it wisely. They'll connect, but not surrender. They'll give, but never again at the cost of self. Because the modern man has finally realized something his father never could. It's better to sleep alone in freedom than to wake up every day beside someone who makes you feel caged. And that, right there, is the quiet revolution reshaping the world. Not with noise, but with silence. Not with anger, but with clarity. Not with war, but with withdrawal. Men didn't stop loving. They just stopped begging to be loved on someone else's terms.